So we're going to do something we have never done before, and we decided it was really worthwhile doing, and that is to actually have a virtual keynote. So Andy is somebody who actually, if you know, virtual is the right word, because he started what we now call the cloud for AWS, and that all started with virtual machines. So I hope by video from Seattle, we're going to welcome Andy. And I hope, Andy, you're on the other side and can see me.
I can see you.
I can see you too now. You look like
your yellow shoelaces. Those are very festive, Michael.
We pay extra for those, Andy, by the way.
Yeah.
But if you want some, depending on how things go today.
Actually, I do. I seriously do.
Excellent. Good. Well, thank you for joining us today. We've got a team here that has been incredibly excited to hear a little bit about what you think of not just the future of cloud, but also how you've built the business at Amazon. And as you know, it's mostly, we've got about 500 people here, mostly founders, built startups themselves. I'd love to have them hear something you and I have talked about on stage many times, a little bit about how you built the Amazon business. It's now, as I understand it, about a $24 billion business, still growing like a startup. And I know the Amazon way is to treat everything like it's day one still. So perhaps you could start by sharing a little bit about what's it been like to go on that journey and in 12 short years build a $24 billion business.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Michael. It's great to at least virtually be with everybody. I think that it's been kind of an amazing adventure for all of us who've been a part of it, and I don't think any of us had the audacity to predict it would have grown as fast as it has. I think in the earliest days when we were thinking about AWS, it really was because we had this problem we were finding here at the company at Amazon that all of our software development teams were taking so much longer to build their initiatives than we thought it should take them. And what we found when we dug into the details was that they were all reinventing the wheel in building their own variants of storage and compute and database and messaging and analytics and the whole set of that set of infrastructure software that should have been something that they were spending about 20% of their time on, with 80% of the time on what really differentiated what they were trying to build for customers, and that equation was flipped upside down. And that was highly frustrating to us here. And I would say that Amazon's a very strong technology company, and we felt like if we had that issue, it was likely that a lot of other companies faced that same challenge. So we kind of set off, and really in the fall, we've been in the market for 12 and a half years, but we started out working on this in October of 2003. So we've been at it for about 15 years. And I remember when the way we presented the idea to the senior leadership team here, we don't do PowerPoint presentations at Amazon. We only communicate via narratives that can be a maximum of 6 pages in length. The appendix can be as long as you want, but you have to assume they'll be. And I remember we wrote this vision document, and there was a lot of debate when we had the conversation about whether we should just build a service. Like the first service we were going to build is what turned out to be S3, our storage service, our object storage service. Whether we should just build a service and see how it did, or if we should build a set of services that could comprise a platform. And we felt very strongly as a team that was proposing this that we should either build a platform or not build it at all, because nobody had applications that only need storage. You need servers and compute and database messaging analytics. So we're fortunate that we made that decision to simultaneously go build a set of services. And when we first proposed the business to the board of directors, there was no pro forma P&L in there, and the board read the document and said, I think you left out the pro forma P&L, Andy, and I said, well, I didn't leave it. I did leave it out on purpose. Here are the set of levers that can make this business a $1 billion plus business that's profitable, or a sub-$1 million business that's very unprofitable. And I don't think any of us know how those are going to turn out, because it was a different model. And I tried to show the ways where it could be big if it worked, and the ways where it would fail if we were wrong. And we don't spend a lot of time here on new ideas at Amazon trying to predict what the actual size of it is going to be. We want to know that if the idea is successful, it can be big, and we want to know that we have a differentiated approach to it, we have some competence in that area, and ideally, if it's not being well served, if we like the answers to those questions, we'll pursue them. So I don't think any of us predicted it would go the way it has. There have been all kinds of surprises along the way. We've had, the very good fortune of good timing, and I think the team's done a pretty good job executing and innovating along the way.
For those of you who don't know it, Andy's very modest, and I've been lucky enough to sort of see that a couple of times, so I'm not going to let him be modest this time. Amazon's web services business is about 10% of the revenue of Amazon, but it's about 60% of the profit. Pretty impressive for a guy who wasn't thinking about a profitable business back then. I'll also tell you that you're about, 100 services now and operating in 200 countries, am I right?
Yeah, that's about right.
And I can't think of a sector you don't have leading customers in these days, whether it's public sector or it's FMCG or whether it's media and entertainment. But where is it that you go next? I mean, I know this is not the end for you. This is just the beginning.
Yeah, it's pretty early in the journey. The business, as you mentioned earlier, is growing pretty quickly. It's a $24 billion revenue run rate business, growing 49% year over year in the last financials we released. And we keep reminding ourselves, though, that we're in the early stages of the meat of enterprise adoption in the U.S. I'd say outside the U.S., they're about 12 to 36 months behind, depending on the country and the sector. So it's very, very early days. We have this strong belief that in the fullness of time, and I don't know if that's 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, that very few companies will own their own data centers, and those that do will have much smaller footprints than they have today. So we're at the beginning of really a titanic shift. I think there's so many areas that are continuing to evolve at such a rapid pace. I mean, if you look at compute, the basic unit of compute is continuing to get smaller and at a very rapid rate. I think people will use these things we call instances in EC2 for a very long time when they need certain compositions of CPU or memory or storage or I/O, etc. But more and more you see companies moving fast to containers. We have a very broad and robust container business that's growing like crazy. And we think, a lot of workloads and a whole generation of developers are going to build in a serverless model.
Right.
We've been pioneering this thing called Lambda for the last few years. It's kind of mind-blowing how fast it's growing. I think databases, which tended to be kind of boring to a lot of people for a long time, they're radically changing. We don't meet large customers who aren't looking to flee who they use for their commercial-grade databases today, just because those solutions are really expensive, proprietary, and high lock-in, and those customers, raise prices constantly and are punitive about licensing and auditing and that sort. So it's why you see so many customers moving as fast as they can from the Oracles and SQL servers of the world to the open engines like MySQL and Postgres and MariaDB. But to get the same performance in those open engines as you get in those commercial-grade databases is hard. We do a lot of it at Amazon, so we have some experience. You can do it. It's just hard. And so what our customers asked us to do was to try and give them the best of both worlds. And so we spent a few years working on our own database engine in the relational side that we call Aurora, which is fully MySQL compatible and fully Postgres compatible. We have additions for each of those, but has at least the same availability and durability as the commercial grade databases because of the work we've done to the query optimizer into the storage engine, but at a tenth of the cost.
Right.
And that is the fastest growing service we've had in the history of our business. But one of the interesting things about databases too is that for so many years, companies used relational databases for every workload. And,
right.
If you have a transactional workload or one that has referential integrity needs, relational can be great. But there are so many workloads where a key value store is what you need, or an in-memory database, or a graph database. And increasingly, we're getting asked from people to think about how we can help them with time series and other types. And what we've done is we've built databases that are purpose-built for each of those use cases. And what we've found is that the days of using relational databases for all of your workload needs, that ship has sailed. People are going to use the right tool for the right job. And then I think machine learning, we're at this stage of machine learning that's so interesting and exciting. I think that the vast majority of applications over the next 5 to 10 years are going to be infused with some sort of machine learning and AI. And we have a pretty gigantic investment in that space. And we really think of it as having 3 layers of the stack. At the bottom layer are for expert machine learning practitioners, where you have people who are comfortable building models and training models and tuning the models and deploying them in production. And those people are comfortable working at the framework level. So one of the interesting things, we have a little bit different approach there than some others, where I think most of the other providers are trying to get everybody funnel into just using TensorFlow. And
right.
TensorFlow for sure has the most resonance today, and about 90% of the TensorFlow in the cloud runs on AWS. So we have a lot of customers using TensorFlow. But if you do a lot of machine learning like we have over the last 20 years at Amazon, if you're doing computer vision, it turns out that Caffe or PyTorch will tend to be better frameworks. Or if you're doing recommender systems or image and video analytics or natural language processing, MXNet scales the best. We will support all those frameworks equally well, because again, what we want for our customers, we want them to have the best tool for the job they're trying to accomplish to save them money and time. But there are very few companies at this stage that have expert machine learning practitioners. There aren't that many of them in the world, and they hang out at the big tech companies. And so if you really want machine learning to become expansive across all the companies that want to use it, you have to find a way to make it much more accessible to everyday developers and data scientists. And so that's why we built something called SageMaker, which we released at our conference last year, called Reinvent, which really is an abstraction and a managed service that makes it much easier for everyday developers and scientists to build machine learning models. And just in about a year we've had it available, we have many thousands of customers who are standardizing now and enabling their development teams to do machine learning on SageMaker. And then that top layer of the stack...
Can I pause you for 1 sec on SageMaker? Because I know you're a sports fan, and I read a fun article about the NFL actually using SageMaker for predictions.
Yeah, it's awesome. They're trying to predict all kinds of ways for consumers, what kinds of plays they can imagine are going to be run next. And they're trying to build, they have all kinds of things they want to build for the teams themselves and how they analyze their upcoming games and their player personnel. But their first task is they're just trying to make the game much more fun and interactive for their consumer customers. And that's one of the ways that they're helping people allow people to make predictions on what routes are going to be run or what routes would be successful, and then having that interactive experience.
And for the Brit in me, by the way, I have to add this in too. I also know your machine learning stuff is being used for things like celeb spotting at the royal wedding, which, hey, I mean, that's really good use.
And facial recognition, yeah. It's kind of amazing how quickly it's being used. And you're talking about some of those services too at that top layer of the stack, which people tend to call AI because it closely mimics human cognition. There are all these services, here's an object, tell me what's in it. Here's a face, tell me if it matches other faces. Like to your example, C-SPAN, if you ever watch C-SPAN, and I tend not to be a big C-SPAN watcher, but I really had it on in the background before. If you, forever, whenever they would have a different congressperson on, somebody would have to run and figure out who that was, and then manually type in the chyron, who it was and where they were from and what order they were. They basically are able to use our recognition service and facial recognition to just automatically identify and match it against a set of faces in Congress, and then just put the corresponding text. And so there's all kinds of services: object recognition, facial recognition, text-to-speech, audio transcription, translation into languages, natural language processing, so that you can figure out what's in all those corpuses of translated text instead of having somebody read it. There's just a really broad set of these AI services that we have available today, but that we're also working on because customers have so many more that they would like us to build. We believe most companies will operate at all 3 layers of that machine learning stack over time. I think probably the single most important one is that middle layer, because I think most companies that have built any business of any size have data sets that are so valuable if they can mine the gems in there and the predictive elements. So those are some of them. I could spend another hour, Michael, but I can tell you want to keep moving on the things we have coming. We're
Actually,
bored anytime soon. I promise you, we will not come in for everybody.
I'm up for the other hour, but I think you have a meeting you have to get to at some point. But let me say, actually, I think we are very much in agreement with you about the opportunity around machine learning. It's funny. I don't know what you get asked all the time, but the number one question I get asked, maybe it's just because I've gotten too old, is, so what career should I take? And of course, people don't come to talk to me about whether they should go to be a beautician or whatever. They come in and say, should I become a programmer or a data scientist? And that question alone, I don't know, I'd love to hear an answer to it. I'm actually puzzled by these days because, like you, I think that the data has become so much of the value, especially when the platform's available to make sense of it. Actually, how would you answer that question?
I would say they're both pretty good. I mean, I think that being a computer scientist or a data scientist, a computer scientist, there are more of them today, and there's arguably a higher need for data scientists and expert machine learning practitioners. But I would also say that we're probably a couple of years away from most enterprises really being able to kind of use machine learning to the extent that they will, just in terms of their capability and the maturation of the ideas and how they want to actually use it. But to me, being a computer scientist or somebody focused on machine learning is this generation's answer to being a doctor.
Right.
I mean, when we were growing up, our parents would say, be a doctor or a lawyer because they were, reputable professions with a very sure way to make a living. And I would argue that today, being a computer scientist or somebody who focused on machine learning is a pretty good bet.
I think my parents would have been happy if I just got a job, actually. But I agree. I think that's what's changing. So fascinating to think about this evolving. And I want to get a sense of when you think about Amazon's roadmap, how do you chart what you want to do versus what, for example, you want startups to do? To speak to it, obviously, we've got a lot of startups in the room. We've invested in machine learning companies like Forge or serverless companies like CloudZero, et cetera. We're excited to be doing that in the Amazon ecosystem. But oftentimes, the startups will come to me and say, well, what's on Amazon's roadmap? And I say everything, because they listen to customers. You just got to be one step ahead. But I'd love to hear from you what you think about.
Well, the first thing for us, and it's one of the reasons why I was excited to participate today, is that, and you know this pretty well, Michael, which is that there is a huge amount of passion inside of AWS for startups. It was really think of ourselves as a big startup. That's the way we operate. And if you go back way back to that vision document I was telling you that we wrote to propose the business, the mental model we had was that we wanted to enable any individual in his or her own dorm room or garage to have access to the same scale of infrastructure and cost of infrastructure as the largest companies in the world. And so the fact that we get to be some small part of so many startups building their businesses, and the fact that we've been able to help startups raise money at later stages with more traction and not to have to spend that scarce capital on infrastructure and the data center or servers has been very rewarding, and it's something that really motivates the entire team. So we're really passionate about startups. And I would say that I think that we want startups to pursue whatever they're passionate about, whatever they think, where they think there's a real customer need and a customer problem. They have a team of people that want to go after the problem and are passionate about it and mission focused. That's what they should go after. And the reality is that most of these market segments are so large and they have so much opportunity that there's not going to be one winner take all in these types of spaces. And I can kind of go through, it's kind of an interesting, juicy story that I know that the press is like from time to time, that if AWS builds a service or launches a service that another company's in, that's lights out for that company. It just isn't reality if you look at what's happened. I mean, in the early days of AWS, we naively, started without having monitoring. We had no monitoring, we had no load balancing, we had no auto scaling, and we kind of hoped maybe we wouldn't have to do it. And our customers said, no, that has to be part of the platform. And we launched a monitoring service called CloudWatch, and everybody said, that's it for New Relic. Well, New Relic seems to be doing okay.
Just fine, yeah.
We had a lot of customers who said, we're running Hadoop on top of EC2, but You're making us roll it ourselves. Could you just make it simpler? And so we built EMR for that. And people said, oh, I don't know what's going to happen to Cloudera or Hortonworks, and those companies continued to do fine. And we launched a key value store, and everybody said, well, what about Mongo? And DynamoDB has done really well, and Mongo has done really well. And
right.
I can kind of through the list one by one. We launched a CloudWatch log service, and Splunk continues to kick it. So it's, I just think it sounds good, but it's not really practical. Now, if all you do as a startup is build a thin shim on top of a platform, you don't really have a sustainable business.
Right.
But the only way all of us have a business over a long period of time is to solve customer needs and to build features and capabilities and to continue to iterate on that. And, when we launch something where somebody else has some type of offering because our customers have demanded that we offer it, almost always our offering is more feature poor and less developed. And if you're doing a good job building a business where customers are happy with your product and you're continuing to iterate, you're going to build a successful business whether we have an offering in there or not.
What's fun about this is, again, Andy's been kind enough to involve me in many of the startup initiatives, and Werner Vogels and I sat on a stage not so long ago talking about this exact issue, and for those of you who don't know him, he's the CTO at Amazon. And he said something which I think Andy illustrates here, which is, if you're a startup and you launch something, it actually is too late if you're not embarrassed by it. And I see you guys do that all the time, and yet the thing that's really impressive is you're then very quick on it. How do you keep that innovation at your scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have not allowed ourselves to change how we think about ourselves and how we think about speed and how we think about the culture. I think that, I mentioned earlier that I really think about AWS as a big startup, and a startup that has more process and mechanisms than we had 10 to 12 years ago, but really we function like a big startup. And so, we believe that speed disproportionately matters at every stage of your business. I think companies get this wrong sometimes. I think that big companies somehow convince themselves when they're leaders in spaces that they don't have to be fast. And in the history of business, how many companies have been leaders for more than 5 to 10 years? Not too many. Right. So, I think that we do some things that allow us to innovate quickly. It works for us. It may not be for everybody. But the first thing is that we disproportionately index in hiring builders. And we think of builders as people who like to create and invent. People like to look at customer situation, customer experiences, and be honest about what's good and what's not good with them, and then seek to reinvent them. And people that get that launch is the starting line, not the finish line. There are a lot of people in technology who are great V1 people, and they lose interest after you launch. And the reality is that everything that you build is going to have issues. You're not going to have all the features. You're not going to get all the features right. Our customers want other things. So you want builders who like to be tinkerers and realize the job's never done. And then we take those builders and we organize into as small and separable and autonomous teams as we can that own their own destiny. So we used to, in the beginning of Amazon, we had product management in one group and engineering in another group and ops in another group. And there was always this finger pointing. If engineering had been faster, we would have had this out now. If product management defined this better, we wouldn't have been late. If engineering built something right, it wouldn't be so hard to operate. When you put all those people on the same team, on a single threaded team owning a service, all the finger pointing goes away. And guess what? The quality of the software gets better too if you're going to get paged at 2:30 in the morning yourself.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
It's a very different model. It's a much higher ownership model. And it also allows them to be really deep and really understand their customers well. And our product and service teams change their roadmaps whenever they want if they find out that what they thought was the right priority order differs from what customers really believe. So we hire builders, we organize them into these small, separable, autonomous teams. Then we give all our teams the same building blocks we give everybody else, the AWS building blocks that allow them to move much more quickly. And then I would say that the two other things that we really insist on doing is that I think big companies, as they get bigger, the senior leaders often walk into rooms to talk about new ideas looking to say no. And I think in part it's because they're conservative, and in part because it just feels overwhelming to have a lot more things that you're going to have to manage. We have the opposite. If you sat in on our meetings on new ideas, first of all, they're the favorite meetings of all the senior leaders inside the business. But we're also spending most of our time problem solving to figure out how we can get to yes. And we don't get to yes all the time, but we get to yes a lot more than other companies. I think the last thing is that we tolerate failure. And it's kind of a weird thing at Amazon because we have these very type A achievement-oriented people who hate to fail.
Right.
And yet culture accepts and understands that if you're going to be pushing the envelope and inventing and trying things and moving quickly, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to get it wrong sometimes. And I think the phone for us was really a culturally reaffirming experience, in my opinion, because even the phone did not work out for us, but a lot of the inputs into that project were quite good. And if you look at how we evaluate ourselves at Amazon, it's very rarely on the outputs. The ultimate output, if you're a public company, is your stock price, but free cash flow and profit and revenue, those are all outputs. You can't manage outputs. What you can manage are the inputs that drive the outputs. And so that's all of our goals we evaluate ourselves on. Almost all of them are inputs. And when we looked at the phone, it was actually a really great technology that with a great team hired, that delivered a really hard initiative relatively on time, that did very good customer research. It just turned out we were wrong about having a value proposition that was differentiated enough to make a go of it. And so what we did was we celebrated those, the builders who got the inputs right.
Yep.
And we found great landing spots for them, because if you don't, you will never find great people who want to take chances on the new initiatives. And so, for me, I think that if you hire builders and you give them small teams where they own their own destiny with building blocks like AWS and let them go fast, with leadership teams that both look to say yes to new ideas and tolerate failure, you get this type of free, innovative thinking from people everywhere in the organization, including during their free time, because there's an incentive to actually want to come up with new ideas because they know there's a really good chance they're going to get to experiment and try it. And so I think that culture really continues to really permeate all of AWS. And a lot of our very best ideas come from, the junior folks and the entry-level folks in the organization who only really have to propose it to their team and get it on the roadmap and try it and see if it works.
As I listen to you, I'm reminded of the session we had sitting at the Harvard iLab, actually, where we talked about culture. And I love hearing this whole, there's room to fail, and we're going to continue to promote people who've done that as the builders that we really value, and on the projects, whether they were successful or not, that we obviously, view as the future of the business. We've happened to have today a bunch of sessions here, keynote, lightning talks, and so forth, around culture. And one of the things that always comes up consistently is how hard it is to hire, and yet how important it is to hire the right people. I'd love to just have, I know we've talked about it before, but for this audience, a little bit of a sense of what are those key criteria for you in hiring?
Well, there are a bunch, and I haven't always gotten it right, for sure. In fact, in the early days of AWS, when we first started working on the idea, I hired the person I hired for product development and the person I hired to run product management before we kind of decided to move them together. They both turned out to be the wrong people, and they were both great people, and they both stayed on with the AWS business for a long time. And one of them was still a very senior person in the business, but I just got it wrong for different reasons, and I knew it was wrong pretty quickly. I knew after 3 months or so that I'd not gotten it right, and it took me another 9 months to make a change, which I think is a trend that probably people see all the time. I have never in my experience made a change when I knew I had the wrong person too soon.
Right.
I think people,
hire slow, fire fast.
And you think and you want it to work, and yet I think we always wait too long. But I think that the best people for us have a mix of things. It's you have to, and this is probably true at any company, you have to have some ballpark of smarts. I think some of the smarts and analytical ability are kind of, you have to have some amount of those where it's hard to be successful inside of successful companies. I think that we look for people who have really great judgment, who are able to look at ambiguous situations where there isn't a traveled path and be able to sort through all the noise and make the right decision. We call that being right a lot. We look for people who are inventive and who are good at looking around corners and thinking broadly. A lot of people are very good at running businesses that are doing well, but aren't that good about looking around the corner for what's about to come and get caught flat. And it's so much easier to be successful if you are moving on the things that are coming than if you're always caught flat-footed and having to follow and chase. We like people who are strategic, but who also are very comfortable rolling up their sleeves and getting into the details. I would say that everybody from Jeff all the way across the organization is comfortable being both strategic and thinking through the details. The details are often where the rubber meets the road. And for managers and leaders, we really want great hirer and developers of teams. One of the things that you realize as you have large organizations is that if you have the wrong leader, it can often take you a couple of years to realize that you don't have the right leader, and then they built an organization underneath them that's all mediocre and not at the standard that you want. I think that one of the most underrated things that leaders can do as companies are scaling, in my opinion, is having extraordinarily high standards. Because as you can't be in every meeting yourself, as the business gets bigger, you want everybody to understand what that standard is, and you want them to propagate it around the organization. And if they're striving to meet that standard, know that's the expectation, you're going to get better results. We look for people who have high standards. And I think the last thing is we like people who are vocally self-critical and are humble and are great learners. I think that there are a lot of people, great people, who reach a certain point of their career and they think they know what there is to know. And I can tell you that there is zero chance that is true. I would say that every few months there's a bunch of new learnings in these businesses that are dynamic. And the second you think you know it all is the second you're unwinding.
Well, I think you summarized it very well, and you epitomize it in the way you are too, and we are very grateful to you for making time. I want to be respectful of time, and we promised to give one personal question and also a question from the audience. So on the personal one, I'll follow on what you just shared, which is obviously, listening to you talk about hiring is inspiring, frankly. But it would be interesting to hear from people, what have you had to change personally as you've gone through this enormous growth in the business? And as you reflect back, what might you share with other founders here that they should think about as they go about building their business at scale?
Well, I've really had to change a lot of things, and they're not that sexy. I think that you change.
By the way, I'm sorry I can't offer you a sprig of water here. This is the most difficult.
I got water right here, Michael. No problem.
Excellent. Good to know.
You change who you hire. You change how you manage. I think that I had managed a number of big areas inside of Amazon before starting AWS, but in every other instance, when things went wrong, the team size and the subject was such that I could go in and rescue it myself. And we would get a decent result sometimes when I did that, but it was not teaching the organization how to scale and how to, it was doing the fishing instead of teaching how to fish. And doing AWS, it really forced me to completely change how I led, because even if I was a technologist, which I'm not, I wouldn't have been able to go into somebody's code and change their code. So it just changed the way that I thought about hiring and the way I thought about managing. And I think the single biggest thing that I've really had to change over time is what we think of as mechanisms at Amazon. So we have this way we think about managing, where we talk about the difference between good intentions and mechanisms. So, a good intention would be that we don't like the way a certain service is performing, and we say to the leader, you really need to make it better. It needs to run faster, or it needs to have lower latency, or it needs to have less errors, or whatever you want to improve. And the leader says, okay, I'm going to do it. And if that's the way that you manage, you're really managing based on good intentions, as opposed to mechanisms which are repeatable processes that you inspect on a consistent basis, and you evolve together what your actions and your progress are. And so I think that the single biggest way that I've been able to scale with the business has been building the right set of mechanisms that allow me to audit and inspect the business at a level that is tenable, but that also allows us to kind of identify where things are either off track and we want to course correct, or where things are going really well and we want to double down on. Because I think if you subscribe to the theory that I do, that speed disproportionately matters in businesses, it also follows that when you have a problem, it's much easier to fix the problem if you know about it early and can course correct than when the ditch gets really deep. And if you have something that's really working, you can bet that others are going to follow and copy you. And so figuring out how to double down and kind of push your advantage and move faster, both to enable customers and to kind of build the business, are also super important. And so those mechanisms, I spend the week between Christmas and New Year's every year reviewing the mechanisms that we've run for the last year and that I'm a part of, and which ones I think are working and we want to keep, and which ones we want to change to be less frequent or not at all, and which ones need to be added given what's most important to the business. And so those have been incredibly important, I think, for all of us in scaling as AWS has scaled.
Well, thank you for that insight. As I listen to that, I'm thinking I got to go back and rewrite my board pack and think about how I get to my discussions with my entrepreneurs who are always incredibly well-intentioned, and think about how do I get them into this notion of mechanisms. It's a great notion. My marketing team will kill me if I do not get the Ask Andy question out, which was tweeted everywhere. So this will be our last question because I don't want to lose the moment. So the Ask Andy question came from somebody who is now going to be the proud winner of the Amazon Echo show. And that was, when do you think we will reach the point where all development is cloud native? It's being done in the browser, and there is nothing other than a cloud service that's being called.
It's a very good question. I wish I knew the answer in the same way that I wish I knew the answer when companies aren't going to have on-premises data centers. I think for sure it's moving that way. I think that it's hard to know how quickly people kind of move off of the laptop and some of those environments but we see in our own cloud IDE as well as others, just the growth is really quickly, and for sure it's moving that direction. I mean, if you look at development in general, if you look at source code management or build and deploy systems, I mean, the amount of that has moved to the cloud already is kind of crazy. It's gone so quickly, and for the longest time, people couldn't imagine not doing that on premises, but now so much of it's being done in the cloud. And even at Amazon, we don't. Most of our incoming engineers don't get hardware issued to them and don't get laptops issued to them. It's all in the cloud now. So there is a very strong momentum for that happening in the cloud. I think it will ultimately become the most significant way people do it. And when it's all there, I don't know, but it's not unreasonable to think that that's going to be the case in the next 5 to 10 years. A whole generation is going to grow up developing that way.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Andy's been very generous, and as is Amazon, to give us his time this afternoon. We all are trying to find answers to these questions, so we're jointly doing a Future of Cloud survey, which will continue afterwards. We talked about it earlier. What remains for me to say is, Andy, always a pleasure talking with you. It feels different this time, but I actually, again, want to celebrate the fact that you are somebody who is willing to do this, to try it, and I think it's great. It worked out very well. You can't see this crowd, so we'd like you to hear them, and as we share our applause and appreciation for you taking the time out today. Thank you, Andy. I look forward to.
I appreciate it, guys.
I look forward to seeing you at AWS reInvent with the other 100,000 people that are there.
I do as well. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Michael.
Likewise. Take care. Thanks again.
Bye.